with some support from the British Museum here in the UK, but also it's very much funded and centered in Nigeria itself. Um, as I understand it, today's talk is more about challenges around heritage, but I would say Ora's substantive role is as director of the MOWAA Institute. But what we are going to have today is, I think, her opinions and views, which she's put together in the presentation she's going to do today. I'm sure she'll be happy for me to say that these represent her views. She's not speaking on behalf of an institution. She's speaking on behalf of herself, who has had a long career now in, I would say, cultural heritage and issues related to that. So without further ado, because we're well past our 11 o'clock start, I'd like to ask you to welcome and invite Ore to give her speech. Welcome, Ore. It's great to have you online.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ola, and everyone else that's part of the team. I just want to apologize again for the rescheduling, but I'm glad that we were able to make it all the same. And another quick apology, I happen to have developed a cold overnight, so if I sound a bit nasal or I reach for a tissue, forgive the apparent rudeness. But I have to say it's really lovely to be here sitting amongst, in many ways, I would say, colleagues and practitioners from who I started my career with. I actually trained initially as an architect and then moved into more urban practice before ending up working more rigorously in the culture management space. So it's nice to see some friendly faces, but also to hopefully learn and meet others on the wider call. So we're here to really talk about my insights that were gained through the course of projects in Nigeria, but also a wider conversation that I think global post-colonial cities are asking and experimenting with, which is about the intersection between heritage and urban transformation. I'll start with a question because it's always quite good to open the mind in that way. But actually, maybe before I do, I wanted to just confirm, maybe I should, Victor, would you like me to share slides on my side?
Okay. Yes, please.
Okay. Great. Can everyone see my slide? Okay.
Yes, please.
Great. So the opening question, I would say, is relatively simple. When you hear archaeology in an African city, what comes to mind? Like many in the room, as I mentioned, I first trained as an architect and later on as an urban planner. In both fields, my understanding of archaeology's relationship to the built environment was not only limited, but skewed. Often a city like Lagos, you rarely see stories about contemporary archaeological practice in Nigeria, especially when it comes to popular media. And there are few archaeologists occupying visible roles in political leadership. So it does oftentimes feel very far removed. And for a long time, archaeology didn't feel like a lived reality or an African lived reality, I should say. It felt more distant, displaced, and somewhat irrelevant. However, fast forwarding to 2022, on joining the MOWAA team, one of the things that became immediately apparent is that African archaeology and the urban environment intersect more often than perhaps we would assume, and also perhaps more frequently than developers in regulated contexts like the UK would prefer. The key reason for this is really about the enforcement of urban planning regulation. In the UK, the archaeological value chain extends beyond purely research-led excavation into cultural resource management, or CRM. And this is really integrated into the National Planning Policy Framework, which requires developers to assess the significance of heritage assets with a strong emphasis on preservation in situ. So effectively, crucially, preservation is directly tied to development control and planning permission as part of a broader environmental compliance. And that goes a much longer way to professionalizing archaeology, but also to expanding the scale of archaeological projects in a context like the UK. And as a result, urban planning, rather than universities, serve as the largest employers for archaeologists in contexts like this. On the African continent, there are certainly countries like South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and others, and increasingly Ghana, that have established CRM systems and are actively deploying preventative archaeology. The most robust practices are still in Southern Africa and are typically still supported by strong university networks and cultural tourism agendas. In Nigeria, where the majority of this presentation will focus, there are legal mandates for site protection. They are typically tied to foreign-funded infrastructure projects, but enforcement is patchy and has tended to be more in an opt-in model. So it's been, in terms of the scale of what could be happening, that has yet to be seen or achieved. But pre-construction archaeology is not simply about digging up artifacts. It can actually inform land use decisions. It certainly can cause delays or reshape development timelines. And in certain cases, it even triggers cultural flashpoints. So in this sense, making a case for archaeology within construction and urban development can appear very counterintuitive, especially in resource-constrained cities that are facing rapid growth, unemployment, and real pressures to attract investment. However, there has been a broader push for tourism and heritage-led development in a number of African countries, who are increasingly mobilizing culture as a tool for urban transformation. Ghana offers a really clear example here. It aligned its national tourism agenda through targeted initiatives aimed at attracting Afro-diasporic capital, really beginning around 2019 with the Year of Return campaign, which was selected because it also marked 400 years since the first recorded arrival of enslaved Africans in the Americas. Since then, and based on the success of that initial campaign, it expanded into a multi-year phenomenon titled the Decade of Return. And this is really a good example of a country that is leveraging its concentration of heritage sites, in this case, pre-colonial slave ports, as well as historic ties to Black American civil rights figures. But what Ghana was able to do was really engineer a compelling return narrative, but embedding this in its economy and its built environment strategy. More recently, I believe most are aware that following the UN General Assembly's call to recognize the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity, Ghana also announced plans to mobilize about $100 million to rehabilitate the network of forts and castles, placing heritage really at the center of an expanding reparations agenda. The key reason, or the key point I'm hoping that is taken away here, is that these sites are really being repositioned as both memorial landmarks and revenue generating assets. And it's really the merging of both historical accountability with urban regeneration within the context of a really clear economic strategy. Ghana certainly is not alone in relaying this as a critical agenda. There are examples from Barbados, from Senegal, Benin Republic, and of course also Nigeria, where we're seeing a broader turn towards culture and historical reinterpretation as drivers of economic development. So for the talk today, I would really want to focus on sharing insights on what this looks like in practice through the lens of my practical experience of supervising the MOWAA Archaeology project in Benin City. I'll be asking a few questions and hoping that others on the call reflect alongside with me. And really, this is an opportunity to think about what happens when heritage begins to define or influence an urban panic logic, who finances these large-scale cultural interventions, and how do regulatory environments and governance structures condition their spatial and social outcomes, and ultimately what determines their durability beyond moments of spectacle. So this image that you are seeing on the screen is a satellite image of the center of Benin City. The landmark there that you see, which is the ring road here, really is at the intersection, one of the busiest intersections in Benin City, but it's also the site that marks what was the original palace grounds, which was, as you can imagine, a medieval city within a city. The between the 12th and 19th century, this part of what is currently Edo State was the spiritual, political, and diplomatic center for the empire. It was renowned for artistic sophistication, really hosting a complex bureaucracy, and even today remains a powerful symbol of pre-colonial civilization and resistance against a imperialism. Within the city or the capital city complex, there were courts, residencies for the palace household, various shrines, processional routes. So really you're talking about a very complex, layered environment, which was why as we started to think about developing the MOWAA campus in the area there where you see the red dot, it was important that we also looked at preserving what remains. This is also in the context of the raising of the city during the British expedition of 1897 and the imposing of colonial infrastructure quite deliberately right on top of places that would have formerly had structures that symbolize the power, the political power and reach of the Oba of Benin. So a lot of the post-independence repurposing is still evidence. So especially with the placement of the police barracks, some of the other public infrastructure related to health and public administration. So this is really a complex that has managed to stay quite central in the political life and broader urban context of Benin City since the 12th century, effectively. And it is really within this context that the new archaeological project emerged, very much, as I mentioned before, tied to the development of the Museum of West African Arts campus. The first building that you see there, the MOWAA Institute, is it's a research and collection center that would host archaeological science laboratories, auditoriums, and a library. And this was also the first space where the initial digs started. And I think it's important to just mention that the form of archaeological practice that was being undertaken here was very consciously driven by the context of the construction process itself, and also involved a lot of interfacing with the architects, the engineers, and the urban regulators in Edo State. So it was really, in some ways, quite new, very new for a lot of the players that were involved in the project. And that made it very sometimes tricky, but also quite a learning moment for us as an institution. The other element that is worth mentioning is that the project itself was situated within a broader master plan that was led by the Edo State government, really centered around downtown Benin and its regeneration. And the vision was really to effectively set culture and the creative industry as an engine for economic growth. So beyond MOWAA, there are plans for new hotels, new residential facilities, retail, and entertainment, as well as really thinking very consciously about how historic monuments within that vicinity could be highlighted and in certain elements upgraded, or should I say restored. The other layer that interacted with this space from a policy perspective was the development of the Edo State's Heritage Preservation and Promotion Law. This really was part of a concerted effort that grew out of conversations both with MOWAA, but other practitioners like the National Commissions for Museums and Monuments, wherein and also I should mention the Archaeological Association of Nigeria, where increasingly the need to ensure that regulation could happen in such a way that it actually amplified the value of cultural assets and enabled for a tourism agenda to grow without deteriorating further the anchoring principles around preservation. And so what you see there is really an example of how many of these conversations were held. The figure in the middle is the former governor of Edo State, Godwin Obaseki, who is engaging with Papa Motayo, the local architect of record, and really trying to understand how the layout intersects with the historical, the layout of the new MOWAA Institute building and the broader cultural districts related to the historic city. That brings me more deeply into the MOWAA Archaeology project. Between 2022 and 2024, we carried out a series of excavations, about 4 in total in Benin City. And all of these were set within the footprint of MOWAA campus. This wasn't a purely academic exercise, as I mentioned before. The locations and the depths were both guided by the building's subterranean design. So any of the, for example, water treatment elements, the foundations, the sewage systems, and even the lack of a basement was also part of a response to thinking about heritage preservation as a guiding principle within the architectural design process itself. The 2 buildings that were predominantly the focus of this work were the MOWAA Institute, designed by David Ajay, and the Rainforest Gallery, designed by a Dakar-based firm called Waraphilia. Both teams were very open to engaging with the archaeological and geophysical data that was produced. And this was especially important at the design stage. I would say that there was more opportunity to actually apply the data that emerged with Waraphilia, partly because of where they were in the design process. So to give you an example, one of the limiting factors that was considered was the depth at which the archaeologists would recommend going, which is about 1.2 to 1.5 meters. And so that both informed the potential placement of some of the subterranean equipment that was required. But also even beyond that, there was an interest in thinking about ways that the building itself could have viewing points that revealed preserved layers of cultural material. I think in the interest of time, I will skip ahead. Victor, do let me know if if I need a bit of a time check.
I sure will. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask, could you expand the image of the presentation?
Sure, let me see if I can do that. Is that helpful? Sorry,
That's great. That's great, thanks.
Oh, let me try and get back into the screen there.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing might be, Aura, if you're happy to share the slides afterwards, we could take a look then. So I don't want to stop your trend. So I think just continue for now.
No problem at all. Sorry, I think I managed to have misplaced the actual slides.
So I could be sharing mine in the meantime while you're trying to fix yours.
That's a good idea. I think, Victor, if you share yours, then Aura will just tell you when to move on. That would be good.
Okay. Sure, let's do that.
If you can find yours.
Yeah. Let me share
Sorry
my
for
screen.
causing chaos.
All right, so I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Yep, got it.
Okay.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. So keep going till Laura says stop. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah.
No, go on.
I think this one, yeah.
Stop.
There.
No,
Sorry.
the one before that. The one before. Oh, is it that one you want?
Yeah.
Okay. Next one. That's it.
Yes.
Stop.
So I talked broadly speaking about the context of the project from a more policy and also the reasons why we ended up within that particular site in Benin City. I wanted to shift focus a bit more to describing more the process and the players that were involved. The program itself was delivered in partnership with the British Museum. I think Ola mentioned that at the start of the conversation, as well as very closely working with the National Commissions for Museums and Monuments, which is the topmost authority in Nigeria for museum heritage management, but also regulates museums across the country. But we also brought in technical partners, mainly from the UK, partly because this was really a specialized form of archaeological practice that hasn't really been perpetuated in Nigeria, like I mentioned before. But we also were quite deliberate about linking practitioners to university systems in Nigeria through both placement visits in the field as well as in the laboratories where we started actually taking sample materials. So it was really an integrative practice that created a strong platform for training and exchange and really brought together both early career researchers, many of whom graduated within a year or two prior to the project from University of Ibadan, and more senior specialists. And this really enabled both a training context, but also pure learning. Next slide, please. So the site itself is, like I mentioned, highly urbanized, located just off Ring Road. Ring Road itself features the National Museum, and just above it you have the Oba's Market, you have the Palace, and a range of other, mostly I would say medium density buildings, some of which still belong even today to the Living Guild practice. Others have now become more private businesses. In the context of pre-construction archaeology, time is critical. It can very easily translate into delays when you're effectively pausing elements of what should be a fairly tightly run construction program to bring in researchers and conservators. So as much as possible, a key priority was to ensure that we could make things as efficient as possible without clashing what we wanted to adhere to in terms of, putting forward international best practices here. You can see in the image in the middle that, oh, so sorry. Let me try and pull out of that. So the diagram in the middle has effectively shows the outline of the MOWAA Institute building in red. And what you see there are test pits. This is really the starting point for the project. It's where we pause to, it's almost like sample testing, to dig quite small pits that were typically maybe about 2 meters by 2 meters wide. And that enabled us to assess whether those were areas that we would do further, more expensive excavation in, and also balancing some priorities in terms of where we had, as I mentioned, particular depths related to the future building function. But the timing element really was a question about trying as much as possible to predict where would be most useful to excavate to recover material that would otherwise be destroyed in the process of construction. And this involved, in addition to these test pits, geophysical surveys, archival research, and consultations with people from the Accra community. Next slide, please. Through both using archival maps and through the oral history accounts from and community consultations, we were actually able to identify that that area was where the Institute building's footprint is, was formerly the wives' quarters. So you can imagine that it would have served, potentially scores of women who were part of the royal household. Some of the finds, like the pottery fragments that came from here, did help to reinforce the theory or the hypothesis that this was the space that would have accommodated the wives. Things like oil residue on even like pottery fragments, which could have been potentially used to store cosmetics. All of this was part of the evidencing of the space that helped us to reconstruct life, what life might have been in this part of the Benin Empire between the 14th and 18th century. But these discoveries also raised questions locally. Public sentiment varied quite widely from concerns about disturbing sacred objects to curiosity about lost treasures, to suspicions around the external involvement of international parties, particular and perhaps more naturally the British Museum. Yeah, even beyond the context of the archaeology itself, some even questioned the focus of museums on ritual objects. And quite a few people just really simply wondered why we're spending such a lot of time digging up dirt in a very hot and humid climate. But all in all, we sought to address this by really quite frontally inviting palace chiefs to come in for inspections, as well as organizing open days with artisans, with local elders, businesses, and organized school groups. And this was done consistently throughout the 4-year period of excavations. Next slide, please. We were also quite conscious about welcoming volunteers from local universities, partly because we want to encourage more heritage practice in other cities across Nigeria and the broader West Africa. And that led to the development of Unearth, which was our flagship program that really targeted mainly final year university students across multiple disciplines related both to archaeology, but also broader subjects such as history, fine arts, construction management, environmental science, and more. This was really quite an instructive way for us to both bring in younger perspectives, but also encourage their engagement in future practice. We were, over the time, I think we probably engaged maybe 25 or so university graduates, and oftentimes for fellowships that ran between 6 to 8 months. So really deep diving into real world practice, but also focusing on a broader contextualization with living heritage by compelling them to engage through creative projects in the local guilds, with other monuments and sites, and also even contemporary artistic practice. Collectively, these engagements, from the site visits and installations to the fellowships, really help to broaden a local understanding of, and we hope, connection to the material heritage. Next slide, please. So what worked? Next slide. I would say that firstly, we completed 4 mid-sized excavations in just 2 years. It seems like a really long process for maybe a construction point of view, but for the archaeologists, they would have much rather preferred that if this was really more research-led rather than preservation-driven, to have spent, even more than double the amount of time than they were giving. And this also happened within a context of quite a complex political and a climate, but was enabled through, I would say, multi-party partnership. Second, we achieved preservation-led changes to architectural design, whereas much of these were minimal and more related to the civil works. So, for example, raising the floors of the auditorium, which is a bit sunken within the, from the, what I would say, the ground level of the other parts of the MOWAA Institute, to, like I mentioned, restricting the building height because we couldn't deepen the foundations to carry the load. But it also even informed other less visible things like the selection of trees for landscaping. So really that level of detail of thinking about what sort of roots might reach much deeper and disrupt critical archaeological material was part of the conscious engagement that happened beyond even the the building construction itself and into the wider environs. Third, we saw really strong engagement from urban planning and architectural professionals, both those that were working as public officials within the Edo State civil service structure, as well as from professional associations like the Nigerian Town Planning Association or the National Association for Architects, who requested to come to learn about not just the archaeology, but also the construction technologies that we were experimenting with, namely the rammed earth technology, because the MOWAA Institute building is a rammed earth building. And I think this very open process and deliberate approach to learning made the development of MOWAA Institute a living laboratory and a very, very conscious learning environment. Lastly, I would just say that the research itself, of course, significantly deepened our understanding of the palace compound, its layout, its social function, its history more broadly. We uncovered probably over 180,000 finds, probably over at least 150,000 of those were pottery shards. So you can see the image on the right-hand side shows what these look like. They were just generating almost every place you stepped, you would stumble on these. Really just making the case for how much of the broader city center is really heritage-rich soil. But we also found other materials, thousands of glass beads, pottery I mentioned before, gin bottles, evidence from more later periods, both in the colonial and in the immediate post-independent phase. Next slide, please. Summarizing complexities here, I would say that aligning the timing for the research with and also the timing for us to train and develop our own teams with the pace of construction and its own deadlines was one of the greater challenges that we faced. Ultimately, we frequently had to go back to the table and the drawing board to just make sure that the programs could be adjusted. We tried to start in areas that will be at the earlier start for the laying of the foundations, even managing the rains, because we had to also do this, both the archaeological work throughout the wet season in Nigeria meant that every moment that you could get out there where it was dry was highly critical, time sensitive, preservation time. Navigating public perception, I mentioned this before. It was important that we both respected the local views around customs and the requirements for certain rights, but also that we communicated the value of archaeology to inform future stakeholder management processes for projects like this in Nigeria. And I think all in all, we were actually surprised that some of the biggest advocates for the project eventually ended up being one of the local churches, partly because they had also themselves been a former site for pre-construction archaeology back, I think, in the 70s. So again, seeing that confluence between heritage practice and the urban environment was part of the messaging that this is not something that is new in Nigeria. It just had fallen out of practice because of resource constraints and perhaps maybe also a difference of political agendas. Re-educating the various professionals, that actually, I would say, went quite well. But I think what we're trying to also figure out are ways that we can build this more consciously into professional urban development practice. And that's perhaps maybe something that could be part of an education work stream within MOWAA. And then certainly balancing access. You can imagine that no archaeologist would want, 50 school children trudging over their archaeological site. It can be quite distracting, but also you get people that might wander off into certain spaces. And also because of the element of time that I mentioned earlier. But nevertheless, we were able to do this in a way that I think really quite radically pushed the boundaries of what public access could look like within a live research context, and have gotten institutions reaching out to us to see whether MOWAA can be used as a case study for their own projects as well. So really good signs in that regard. Next slide, please. What makes the difference? I would say, firstly, political will. It was really quite helpful to have the governor himself, both through formal policy, but also more informally through by being visibly present, through making statements in front of wider public officials, demonstrate his vested interest in seeing cultural preservation be taken seriously within a context of urban regeneration. Even before the legislation in Edo State came to play, there were signs of visible alignment between the urban regeneration plan and the new tourism agenda. There was a legislation that was put forward to actually establish a separate tourism board, which didn't exist before. So really being quite deliberate was helpful, although I think that there are some ways in which sometimes politics also complicates the manner in which projects that perhaps could benefit from a more neutral stance can actually evolve as a result. Second, I would say that the scaling or the clustering of a network of projects really does help to situate this as a practice that could emerge beyond a single building or asset. I think the evidence of creative and cultural districts in Benin City, in Dakar, the multi-city network that Benin Republic is also cultivating are all really great examples of the the executive leadership in these countries and municipalities really seeing the gains of tourism growth, accessibility, and diasporic talent sourcing and investment as being critical for a broader economic agenda. Heritage as a design logic, I've mentioned this before. Effectively, I would say that when you see that actively shapes architecture and urban decisions, that is when there's a much stronger push for a much improved, I would say, case for longer term preservation, but also a richer engagement more broadly. And it goes without saying that if you don't have money or you don't have the skill sets available, then there isn't very far, you can't go very far. So this was really a key in maintaining the momentum. And I think part of what would be important for MOWAA Institute in particular is to see how we can perpetuate this in the future life of the program. Next slide, and I think hopefully it'll be the final slide. Yes, so I wanted to just end on this note. This is an image of the MOWAA atrium space. It's part of the foyer that leads directly from the reception into the most public-facing room within the MOWAA Institute. And it was really important that as we thought about preparing for the display here, that we communicated both the broader function of the building from the archaeological practice and our work in terms of storage and in art conservation, but also that we enabled a reshaping, hopefully, of a broader understanding of both local production and archaeology. So a lot of the finds in this room actually represent materials from Nok, Igbo-Ukwu, Ife, and other archaeological finds that were sourced and ended up in the national collection in Nigeria. But some of these also points to newer stories that are emerging around how design is reshaping our understanding of urban practice. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I hope it wasn't too esoteric. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is position MOWAA not just as a building, but as a practice that where we have really a confluence of archaeological science, conservation, intersecting with contemporary practice, everyday life, and urban design. Thank you.
Sorry, my microphone is muted. Sorry. Thank you very much, Ora. I was saying, should we keep the slides on in case we want to refer back to them? The only problem is that we can't see who's got their hands up and so on. So I think, Victor, we're going to have to keep you on standby in case we need to bring back the slides. But I think it would be good if we could all, or Victor, if you could stop slide sharing now so we can see everybody who is online. So first of all, again, thank you very much, Ora, for a really, I think, all-encompassing discussion and also introducing us to MOWAA, which is interesting as well. As a ex-architect, the only thing I would have liked to see was the site section showing exactly where it was all happening. But, you know, again, I mean, you're not, as I had pointed out before, I know these are your views, although you are very much involved in MOWAA. So thank you again for being able to share with us so much about what's going on. I think probably to start off, whilst people think about questions they've got, I'd ask, I guess, the issue about how MOWAA therefore relates to what I assume is still the National Commission for Archives or whatever at Onicon. So is this therefore the practice and I guess the facility that does the practical that now is going to be located within MOWAA in Benin? Or, I mean, I'm assuming they work in relationship to each other, but they are different entities. Because especially your last slide, which basically says, you know, these are things from collections that the National Museums has, whether it's Igbo-Ukwu, Ife, wherever. So what is that relationship? So yeah, I guess that's the question. How does MOA relate to the National Commission and so on?
Yeah, that's a really great distinction, I think, to put forward. So I would say one in that is that we are, whilst MOA is a private institution that focuses not just on antiquities and historic and works and heritage management practices, but also looks into contemporary art and creative design. The National Museum has a really embedded focus on, older heritage material. And so what we're able to do is actually have conversations across time in a way that really, I think, adds, enriches the narrative. The second point to mention is we do very much see ourselves as being part of a broader ecosystem and offering value add that focuses on bringing a professionalizing, let's say, practice, because there hasn't unfortunately been as much nationally funded archaeological work in Nigeria. Typically what you have is driven by universities and in the context of fieldwork related to coursework, or driven by international based archaeologists who might be of African or Nigerian descent, but come in for very fixed periods of time to conduct fieldwork and then take that knowledge and the resources back. So what we're really trying to do is to situate and also expand and update contemporary museum and heritage management practices and have that be available and accessible to both practitioners in Nigeria, but also across the wider West African ecosystem. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a really now I'm opening the questions to the floor. I see very interesting people, Tolu, Susie, Kofo, Marcel. Have we got questions to come through immediately? Okay, whilst you're still thinking, somebody's got hands up. Kofo, go for it. I think if you unmute yourself, if you can, or we can do that. Victor, it's Kofo Adeleke.
Yeah, she's actually unmuted. Yeah.
Can we hear you? Hi, Kofo, we can't hear you yet.
I think it's a network.
Okay, I mean, maybe if you type your question into the chat, then Victor will relate it to us if there are problems. In the meantime, what I could ask you, Orez, so Warifala and Ajayi Associates, what was the relationship? So again, for those who are not in the architectural medium, I feel I'm colonizing this. Ajayi Associates, well, he's Ghanaian, although the name sounds Yoruba, and he's located, I think, partly in the UK, but he's had a stellar career, and this is one of his major projects, which was not pooled, so it's continued and it's nearly complete. Warifala are from Senegal, I believe, and they've worked a lot with rammed earth. So they're one of the architects of the moment. The zeitgeist at the moment in architecture in West Africa is actually rammed earth. I think I put it through to Ora to explain to us how they work together, how the rammed earth experimentation worked, and so on and so forth. I mean, you talked about the depth as well. So maybe if you start about it being underground as well, this is the thing about the section, which might have. So go ahead. In the meantime, Kofo, we're waiting for your typed question. We will relate that after this. Thank you, Ora.
Yeah, no, so they both designed two separate buildings within the broader MOWAA campus. I probably should have actually started by explaining that the MOWAA has also evolved its design as we started working and really thinking more practically about what we wanted to how to deliver our mission most effectively in Nigeria. And so rather than one like monolithic building that had, predominantly galleries, we now have really a disaggregated or deconstructed array of functions and buildings from the Research and Collections Facility, MOWAA Institute, which we started from. But the idea was to also have artist studios, an art gallery space, and also other amenities, gardens, public space, etc. So what was interesting really is that whilst yes, we did have different architects coming at different phases of the project, there were also quite a number of workshops where the architects would sit down together and really think about how their buildings related to one another. So whilst Ajayi Associates was both responsible for the design of MOWAA Institute, the Ramdet building, they also had a broader overseeing role on the master plan for the campus. But it worked in a way that brought in, like I mentioned, local architects like Papa Motaya from MOE Plus, as well as a series of other architects who were working both on restoring some of the existing buildings to reuse them, a new build, and also even thinking about the replanting of an indigenous rainforest within the wider context. So you can imagine just how complex in some ways, but how we didn't want the campus to feel disaggregated. So it's really, really important that there was a complementarity between the various approaches while still maintaining the individuality and of each architect's own design ethos. But yeah, just to maybe go back to the Ramda, it was interesting how the process of trying to get the right quality of soil within a region that would make this more sustainable, because obviously it doesn't make sense to be importing what is probably going to be like 80% of your building material from outside of the state. And even if you were going just beyond the city, that still required, careful logistics and costs. And this was important not just for the rounded elements of the building, but also for the colored concrete or structured elements that were also like blending laterite with the concrete, partly to achieve the color, but also to reduce the carbon footprint of the building overall. And I think what was quite interesting was seeing how we had to almost leverage our own material scientists within the wider city, working with labs at local universities, but also working with specialists who had done rounded buildings in places like Ghana to come and help train urban practitioners. And it was important that we didn't just bring them in to do the work, but we actually involved a longer term skills development, not just for the sustaining the maintenance of the building, but also for hopefully inspiring more of these low, sustainable and low cost forms of building within Nigeria itself.
Thank you. I think Kofo's question has come through. So Victor, I'll leave you to be the, what's the word, elocutor.
Yeah, right. So I'll just read out the question to you so you'd respond to it. So Kofo is saying 4 things. Firstly, did you review Nigerian planning laws for references to cultural heritage? And the next question is tourism, or do you want to take it one by one? Which one works
I
for you?
think run all 4, because I think after that Marcel has her hand up, so
right.
we will have to. So
second question is tourism-led developments in Ghana. That's the heading, I think. Then tourism related to monuments has been greatly boosted by my information. But my information is that the government isn't putting money into it. They're waiting on reparations money. The third question is, did the archaeological work look at the Benin City moats? And then number 4 is, thank you.
The 3 questions and a statement. So yes, we did review Nigerian planning laws. What we found was that some states in Nigeria have actually more of an integrated approach to thinking about heritage, the environment, and the urban economy. So Lagos State, for example, is one. There are a few others beyond the Southwest that also do this, but Edo State in particular did not have that degree of integration. And also critically, it didn't have its own state level database of monuments and sites, as well as intangible heritage. So it was important to actually strengthen the legislation and also put forward another layer of should I say building protection. So as you have like listed buildings in the UK, to really think about trying to have some further restrictions to ensure that the rich cultural heritage and also even some of the newer and more modern architectural buildings, such as the Demaswanko building, which is actually just next door to MOWAA, were also embraced within this legislative cover. So on the tourism-led development in Ghana, so part of the fundraising that is happening right now is for the preservation of these ports. And I think that's been an important marker because I think there are probably like 15 to 20 castles and ports across Ghana. So the actual share volume and cost of managing and maintaining them is not necessarily something the Ghanaian national government has the resources to do. But certainly it is being seen as increasingly part of a draw for a diasporic tourism. But I would just maybe say that, I do think that Ghana's agenda is much broader than just focusing on tourism. They are also really quite conscious about leading the identity politics of Africa in this emerging area. And they have, they were the first West African state to get independence in 1957. So they do have really quite a strong history of leading in really reshaping political thought and repositioning Black and African identities. Did we look at the moats? We did. We did in parallel to the work that we did with the British Museum, we also partnered with the German Archaeological Institute and the Archaeological Association of Nigeria to survey moats across not just even Benin City, but beyond into other parts of the hinterland where you actually have, just kilometers of moats going on for quite vast stretches. And part of this was really building off the work of an archaeologist called Patrick Darlin, who spent a significant, probably over 2 decades in Nigeria, surveying these monuments, which are rapidly disappearing in the landscape. One of the things that was actually part of the proposal from Edo State government's urban regeneration plan was to where possible, rethink the road network to preserve the moats and also to find ways of bringing them to the fore in the urban landscape. So through like reconstruction, canopy walks, allowing for much more visible perception of them within the urban space. And if you think about it, there are not a lot of cities in Nigeria where you have a very visible monumental evidence of ancient history. And so part of the opportunity that we have in Benin City is to provide and afford that experience in a manner that really situates African civilizations in, the same level as other historic spaces in Greece and all across Europe and in, Zimbabwe and Kenya, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really the vision. But as always happens, it's timing, it's power play, and it's resources that all have to be taken into consideration. So that's probably a very lengthy response.
Right. So we had Marcel with her hand up for a long time. And then I think there's somebody who's got a question from Sudan. But Marcel, over to you because you've had your hand up.
No worries. I just, first of all, I just want to celebrate this work. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think it's just fantastic and gives me a real sense of hope as we move forward in terms of, identity, decolonization, etc., whatever words you want to use. But it's just so empowering to see this work. And what I love about it is sort of the visible underground layers that are kind of coming through. My question is, how can we bring this into the mainstream? I work in informal settlements, and these are spaces, growing spaces, spaces where there's real opportunity for community involvement so that this becomes a labor of love across, at a wider scale. I'm just conscious that as we move forward with all the challenges we have in terms of climate and degradation, et cetera, this becomes something less of a priority. So I'm thinking, how can this become ingrained into modern cities as we know them becoming? How can we build off this? The rammed earth is a key one for me because it speaks so much to valuing what was already there. So it's a kind of easy link between the past and the future, one that people tend to negate often. I'm also a background of an architect in urban spaces, or so I get that shift and how important it is, moving forward. But those nuances of materiality has to come with us as we go into the urban space. And how do we shift thinking, right? Away from materials that don't make sense in the way we're moving and building our futures, so that it also allows us to pick up those modern materials, but also pick up the archaeological values as we move forward. So it might not be an easy question, but I just wanted to put that out there as a reflection from this work. So yeah. Thank you.
Can you just say where you work particularly? Because which part? I'm assuming it's somewhere in Africa. Yes.
Yeah, I work across a few countries, but predominantly Zimbabwe, where I'm also from. Ori, you mentioned that a few times. I'm working in Tanzania, working in Kenya. Lots of spaces there and others.
All right, over to you.
No, it's a really well thought out and reflective question, and I think one that certainly requires ecosystem thinking, really a push around legislation, I would say. And I don't mean legislation in the way that, typically it's applied where it's, a hammer that's, a punishing or regressive approach, but linking the development of new legal frameworks to incentives that can actually grow the profession and do it in such a way that it actually provides new jobs, new earning opportunities, grows new local industries, and also starts to link more consciously into the education system. Part of, like you mentioned, the rammed earth, and also just thinking about this notion of how do you communicate sustainability and heritage and identity through materiality to someone who might just be a layperson. I remember we had in Nigeria, we call them the Iyaloja, which is effectively the head of the traditional market. And we invited market women to come to the site as part of these like community consultations. And the head actually said to us, she pointed at the rammed out walls and she said, I know this. This is my great-grandfather's house. And effectively, she was referring to the stratifications of the rammed earth, which actually are quite aesthetically and visually similar to the way in which chiefs' houses in ancient the Benin Empire would have looked like. So this idea of visual cues, of bringing forward materiality really just opens up a conversation that allows someone like her, who may not be seen as being critical to the conversation, to actually start thinking and engaging with other models for urban sustainable practice that are more linked with local heritage and livability. I think more broadly, I would just say that it will likely take, a few critical major projects to really anchor it into industry and practice. And I think some of the challenges we face is that oftentimes this work is typically led by NGOs or underfunded public institutions. And so you're not really able to go far. But I actually think that there's a lot of positive optimism around heritage practice with, visibility for projects like this. And I'm just hoping that we get the politics right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that's an engagement at different levels in terms of education, because I think even as you said, so it was kind of graduates from Ibadan University, but there's almost something about if the Yaloja understands, you can actually trickle it right down to the community to really have an engagement with what is going on, which is, really impressive. Now, I mean, we've got DC, who's I think sent a lot of text questions as well. But I wonder whether I'm actually going to use my chairs, whatever it is, to get Julia to ask her question. Then DC will respond to your questions, and you can even ask them yourself because you've got your hand up. But Julia, do you want to give your question, and then we'll speak to DC?
Yes, thank you, Ola. Um, Actually, it's not much of a question, it's more a request. In the beginning of your presentation, you said a lot about how it is inserted in the city and how it relates to the historic spatial organization of the city of Benin. And also you talk about African vernacular forms. I was very interested. I'm starting to study a little bit of the organizational aspects of cities in West Africa, specifically in my case, Guinea-Bissau, but in a comparative Bissau in a comparative manner. So I would like to ask you, because I took a look during your presentation, if I could find more pictures and more information about the architecture, the project itself. So I don't know if it is available for us to see the project and how it started, how these spatial issues are presented, because you said it at the beginning of the presentation, but you don't have the time to explain everything. So maybe some information from the architect or the architects or
Yeah,
something like that.
it's always tricky trying to manage and balance emphasis during a short time. I would say please do go on the MOWAA website. We do have some more visual content. I would also just mention that hopefully if we maintain our publication schedule, there will be an actual research publication coming out from the MOWAA Archaeology partnership that will provide much richer content than I could during the course of this actual talk. But more specifically, I think a lot of what was good about bringing on board the team from David Ajay and also working with the urban specialists was that they actually did a lot of broader research and urban study before the project took off, and also looks at archival work, so photographs from places like I think the Pitts Rivers, from the British Museum's own collection, that actually show what Benin City looked like in the early 18th and 19th century, and also accounts from historians and from traders who
Travelers,
travel.
Dakar,
Exactly,
and so on. Yeah.
exactly. And so Benin City is one of a few places where there were actually descriptions and sketches and later on photographs. And that really helped to shape our understanding, not just of what the buildings looked like, but also evidencing that there was an urban planning agenda that was guiding the development of this medieval city. And it wasn't just an accident that we have the moats being like running through particular districts. So it was very much linked both to spatial control and governance, but also through some of the work that we're doing, we're learning more about some of the environmental management elements or functions of the moats as well. Yeah. So I know I didn't quite answer your question, but just keep a lookout.
Okay,
I would.
DC, over
Thank
to
you.
you. Otherwise, Victor, if you can read through the questions she has asked. Not sure.
Right. I wanted to raise my hand first before asking the question. Right. So DC, his question is, I don't know if it's he or she, how can we examine the case of South Sudan, a young African nation that came into being in 2011, in relation to the team building with the past, basically the title of this presentation, given that much of the country is characterized by predominantly rural settings rather than urban environments? And then the next is same person. To what extent have African countries advanced efforts toward restitution of their material culture, much of which remains housed in museums in Europe, Asia, and other regions? Right, over to you.
DC, can you say a little bit more about what elements of South Sudan's whether urban development or heritage preservation that you're particularly interested in, just so I can tailor my question, because it's quite a broad question.
Well,
Yeah,
maybe.
thank you very much. Yes, come.
Hello, yes, we can hear you. Keep talking.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of you. And I'm a heritage professional here in South Sudan for the last 25 years. And I'm interested in this presentation, especially archaeology and heritage development. As I said earlier, that South Sudan is a country which came into existence in 2011. And then you need to distinguish between rural and urban. Most of it is really like another African country. And the issue of heritage development become a concern. And we need to have some techniques, especially for expertise from different African countries who can come and also plan with us on how we can develop this from rural to urban. And the opposite is true. Concerning the issue of material culture, which were in different parts of the museum in the world, we have been informed that there are over 25,000 pieces of our heritage collection there in different museums. And even today, we brought some of them also. This generation will not know that this thing will belong to them because there's a age gap, generation gap between this material culture and the existing generation. And there was an idea of restitution this with the trend which we did in Italy in 2023, that there should be a plan for restitution of this material culture to African countries, including South Sudan. We received one of the items in 2009, known as Rod of the Prophet Ngundeng, which you can, Rod of Prophet Ngundeng, you can look over it. It spent in something like 80 years in UK and was brought home to South Sudan. That was only a case, but there are many more than that. So I'm delighted to be part of you, and we hope we continue presenting this, especially I'm delighted with the presentation of Oro Disu and the rest of the team. Thank you very much. I'm Daniel Shodar. Thank you.
Thank you. I almost don't want to respond. I think it's a really broad and open question. Maybe one thing I will say is that from my fairly limited knowledge about the archaeology and heritage of South Sudan, I do know that you have surprisingly some of the I don't know if the pyramids are actually in South Sudan or in Sudan, but I do know that there have been threats faced by conflict, really, to some of these monuments.
Sorry.
Yes.
The pyramid, most of them are in the northern part of Sudan, but actually it was part of the Sudan because Sudan was one, and most of the heritage side are in the north, far north to Egypt. So that was a continuation. And when we become independent in 2011, we did not divide the heritage heritage properties. But our heritage is in the northern Sudan, especially with the Jebel Barkel, one of the UNESCO heritage site, and the rest of the site there. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll say two very quick things. One is that the focus here was on pre-construction archaeology as a tool for heritage preservation within typically urban contexts, but of course, construction and development also happens in rural settings. And so it's there's still a lot of applicability in terms of the manner in which the methodologies and the lessons from experiences like MOWAA can be applied in that setting. Roads actually tend to get ignored in archaeological monitoring processes because they aren't, it's a lot more complicated. You're looking at long stretches as opposed to one concentrated effort for, as you can imagine from an excavation point of view, it's a lot more logistically, it's logistically easier to focus on one site than across a quite linear expanse. But I think ultimately what we're hoping is that we would see more practitioners being trained, both within more professionalized circles, i.e. coming out of like universities or post-university extension programs, but also having communities who are the frontline preservation army, so to speak, also being able to help with monitoring, helping with reporting and identifying sites, because part of what we're trying to do is also to improve the database and to share that knowledge. One of the projects in Nigeria that we're also looking to develop relates to the Sumbo-Oredo earthen modes in southwestern Nigeria. And like we're seeing a lot more interest in communities themselves actually setting up centers so that they can receive visitors or have a way to actually showcase their narrative in their own words. And I think really thinking about smaller scale solutions and not just thinking about the more expensive, large scale partnerships will help bridge that balance between the variety of spaces and capabilities that exist across the continent.
Right. We've got Victor who's got his hand up. I think I saw Tolu typing, but have you just gone away?
Yeah, he's done typing. Yeah.
He's still
He has a
typing.
question.
Okay.
No, he has typed already. His
Okay,
question
so
are in the chat, yeah.
okay, so I'm thinking that if we read Tolu's question and get Victor to give his question, we're probably at a stage of near roundup, unless there are others who want to contribute. I'm sure that with a bit of pleading, you can possibly email Ore if there are questions that you think of later on. But I think we've really spent a lot of time with her, which is fantastic. And what it means is that we should really all go as soon as possible to Benin to see this. But so I think unless there are any other questions, again, I'm using my chair's action to say, let's read Tolu's question. Victor gives his question, and that's the kind of roundup of things we're going to ask of Ora before we let her go. Anybody who disagrees? Nope. So Victor, you do the reading and then ask your question, and then we will be on the home run.
Okay, so this is from Tolu. Tolu says, did the excavations offer any new insights beyond what exists in quotes, canonical research, metals, glass, porcelain, and evidence of Benin's far-reaching trading interest? And he added actually trading and diplomatic interest. That's his question. Okay,
short answer is yes. I would say that the research is actually still ongoing at the moment. So we've done the excavations, but you can imagine we've done excavations. We have also and continue to do community consultations to help with the interpretation, but there's also the lab-based work. And we've been dating really using carbon dating methods in laboratories, predominantly in the UK actually, to really try and understand what we're looking at alongside with other features. And yes, it is certainly challenging and transforming understanding about the extent and also the layout of the palace structure. So, for example, prior, it had always been thought that the guilds existed not within the more sort of like residential areas, but we did find evidence of iron slag, which suggests that there might have actually been some slag is just the waste material, so to speak, from processes of smelting.
Yeah.
So finding that within actually quite close to one of the older sort of ancestral shrines suggested that that particular site may have actually had some small scale industrial practice. And then more broadly, in terms of trading, diplomatic interests, some of these are quite tricky to infer from just looking at the materials, of course. But there was one interesting find in that one of the glass beads actually looks like it actually came from Ife. Again, suggesting a relationship potentially with Benin, which we've always known about more through oral history, but actually having a way to situate it within an evidence archaeological context. And there are several other examples of this, but due to time, I think those are the main two I'll share.
Right. I mean, I think unless these questions are pressing, Tolu and Deng, I'm going to overrule. But I mean, if they're quick questions, by all means, speak. But otherwise, can it wait, Tolu, or do you want to? It can wait. Okay. Deng
Yeah,
is. Mhm.
sorry. Yeah, mine is that just just giving more thank and also think of sharing the presentation.
Oh, okay.
Maybe through WhatsApp. Thank you. That's it.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
we'll come to that. Yeah, we'll work through that. Okay. Victor, over to you. The last question, and you do the vote of thanks as well.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So my question is regarding the value we place as a country on this heritage, memory, and history and archaeology generally. Because I remember your interview with Darren, where you mentioned that, for instance, the government has removed history from secondary school in Nigeria, right? So it shows that to a large extent, the government doesn't really value, heritage as a whole, right? So, and the reverse is actually, the paradox is funny because the foreign countries seem to be more interested in heritage, archaeology, history in Nigeria than the Nigerian government itself, right? So my question is, why do they seem to be more interested? Do you think that there's an ulterior motive, which I doubt, but do you think that there's something underlying these factors why they seem to be more interested in our own history and our own heritage more than we ourselves in Nigeria and Africa generally? Thank you.
It's a loaded question, and maybe a strong way to end what has been a highly enjoyable conversation with you all. I would just say first, I can't deign to be a mind reader, or to put words in the mouths of other institutions and insinuations. I think that there has always been a lot more scholarship being generated, not just in heritage management and archaeology, but across science, humanities, from other parts of the world about Africa. And it's one of the reasons why it was really important that we established a research practice and didn't just have a time-bound project in Nigeria. Unfortunately, every country makes priorities about where it invests its resources, and with the decline of insecurity, issues around healthcare and education, the need for large infrastructural development, it's not entirely surprising that culture and history in particular fell off the bandwagon, I should say. But it is crucial that it is increasingly centralized, and we are seeing that. More visibility because of projects like this, because of the global restitution movement, and history, I just want to add, has been reinstated into the mandatory elements of the curriculum. So sometimes decisions are made by, I don't want to be disparaging, but it might be made by one person who just unfortunately has access to a pen with power. But I think other times I do agree that it can be symptomatic of a deeper displacement of culture as a value that can actually be mobilized to do a lot more than just paint pretty pictures. Yeah.
I think that's a really good way to stop. Okay, Victor, you've been taken off the vote of thanks. I mean, I think this has been an incredibly wide-ranging talk, and also I think the Q&A session as well at the end has been equally wide-ranging. Particularly thank you to Deng. I mean, I'm assuming you're calling from Sudan, are you? And we've got Marcel, who may have
from
left.
South Sudan.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah, and
the same, the South Sudan and Sudan
South
is the same.
Sudan, sorry. But are you calling from South Sudan at the moment? Where are you logging in
Yes,
from?
I'm right now logging in Juba.
There you are. So we've got
Yeah.
we've got the what do you call it? The African, the AU, the African Union is with us.
African Union and also C5 with the issue of peace. But I'm working for the Minister of Culture. I'm working for the Minister of Culture, Museum and National Heritage.
Okay, so we recognize you. I think that is really important as well. And I think we have platforms like this which allow us to share this heritage and knowledge. I mean, I think it requires probably another discussion and conference around indeed how a compelling narrative has been made by certain countries. Probably leading the way is Ghana and some others, whereas in some ways, I think the MOWAA project is large, but it's this issue about how do we have this narrative, which is interconnected. It's not actually just Africa. I mean, the issue about even the restitution is that restitution is needed because bits of the rest of the world came to Africa. How do we resituate ourselves? And I would say the work that Aure and team are doing in MOWAA is a way in which this becomes a situated, practice at various levels, both in terms of market women, how we look at the urban fabric, and indeed what these international connections are. I mean, we haven't even talked about what this will do to presumably tourism in Benin. I have no idea. Do people fly into the Sheraton? There's a whole further economy that this links into, which has to be a good thing. Certainly nowadays, when we think about what is happening elsewhere in the world, this need for the international, I think, understanding of culture, and particularly African culture, which, as you pointed out, has been very much neglected over time. And this, I think, almost the upgrade and having it really become part of practice that is not just situated in, oh, that's an archaeological dig. This is something that is living, it's part of living cities, has been really, really interesting. I think we will hopefully be able to invite you again in person to come and talk to us. And we probably, AHUWA, we need to think about maybe our first excursion. It might be to somewhere like Benin once you're up are you up and running? That's the question. When can we come and visit?
We are taking in visitors. You just have to inform us beforehand. But yes, everyone is more than welcome. I'll just very quickly steal back 30 seconds to say that typically every year or other year, we have an annual seminar at MOWAA that has focused initially on archaeology, but we're broadening it to really think about heritage practice as a systems practice or thinking. And we're hoping to actually host that seminar this November, I would say. So please do stay posted. We'll be having
keep us informed.
Yes, I will share with Professor Duku, and I hope others can also be part of it.
Okay, well, all it remains to do is for me to say thank you to you, and can we, within our Teams boxes, send the thanks and positive thoughts to Aure. Thank you very, very much, and we really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you to
Thank you so
Victor
much.
and to Taibat and everyone that organized it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know, my name is, I was in part, let me tell you this. On the issue of naming,
Yeah.
Okay.
it's special African names.
Uh-huh.
It's frozen.
Oh, I think his network
He's
froze.
frozen.
Thank you, Dang, for your contributions. I've enjoyed having you part of it.
Yeah. They say Deng is Chinese, Nial, Cambodian, Xiu, Japanese. But I told them everybody was in Africa. Everybody was Africa.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
because
let's
everybody was
reclaim
created in
it.
Africa, especially East Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye, everybody. Bye, Tolu. Bye, Susie. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Aura.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.